So this morning, this is perfect, actually, because we're going to talk about worship. So we're not even going to stop where we left. We're going to continue on. And one of the awesome things about worship is it's been something that has been a part of my life for a very long time. I would say since the very beginning. My parents, which my mom is here, my dad's at home watching, raised me in a home of worship. And a lot of times, I think right now we're seeing moves of worship within colleges, within even the worship music industry. Things are changed, musically. Things have changed where it's real popular and fun to have worship music and be a worship leader. But what a lot of us are trying to define is how do we not make it a role, but a lifestyle. And so it's real easy to go, oh, that's nice and shiny and bright. They're on stage and that's great. The lights, the flashes, the recording of, hey, we're going to be at the Midland Theater. But the thing that I want us to kind of walk through is the practical of why we get into this, and this is going to fall off, so give me a minute. Why we get into the call, or I think we've had a lot of teaching lately of let's go after worship, which is totally the heart of God. But I also like to bring those down to practical things of how do we even do that, right? We're drawn in to go, yes, my heart. There's something in our heart that kind of triggers where we're like, yes, that's exactly what I want, but how do I get there? And even living in a household that was stewarded in worship growing up, it had to be intentionally set before us. It had to be one of those things where it wasn't passive. It wasn't a Sunday morning. And in order to kind of put parameters and boundaries around that, I want to revisit a couple of things. So last time that I talked, we talked about hope in a very different way than I had ever grown up in the church hearing. Am I okay, Eduardo? Or am I cutting in and out? Okay. So hope is this wonderful thing that we hear a lot in the world. Oh, I hope you get to feel better. Oh, I really hope that this is going to happen. I really hope I'm going to get that house. I really hope that X, Y, and Z are going to happen. I really hope I get some really good food for lunch. Really hope Josue is doing great and Leigh's doing great in Cuba, right? But biblical hope challenges us to not live in optimism. And if we look at those statements that I just rattled off in general, optimism is rooted in that hope. Oh, hope it's going to turn out right. We don't see that the character and nature of God actually gives us a biblical hope that's called kavah in Hebrew, to go, actually, my hope is in the Lord, and he's going to work it out for me, even if everything around me says it's not going to happen. Because his past history and his past character make him who he is. He's not a God that lies. I'm sorry. He's not a God that lies. We can agree on that. So if he doesn't lie, then his promises are rooted in his truth. So if they're rooted in his truth, our hopes, our biblical hope, the kavah, is something that we cannot go into and go and use optimism to fill that void. Because optimism does not have a history with God. Optimism does not have something that we can tangibly hold on to from his faithfulness of his past, of our past, and how he's shown up in our present and in our future. The reason that I call that into reevaluating is that as we set our hearts to worship God, where our hope is very key and very important. Because worship, when you break it down, it's not this, I'm going to feel great afterwards. That's self-serving. Worship, when you break it down, it's a call for us to adore God, to give him all of our worship and all of our praise. What does that look like? That's in everyday life. I can make up a song, sing it, and it be amazing in worship from my experience. But my heart posture and how my heart is determines where my worship is coming from. If it's coming from a self-service and idolatry, or if it's going to come at the posturing of our heart of worshiping a king who is worthy. There's a lot of things that we can take in optimism. But when you break it down and you realize how much hope that God gives us in the Bible and in our own lives, optimism becomes something that's neutral. It comes as we try to use it for hope, but we end up getting disappointed every time. And the consequences to that is that we turn and we go, oh, it's God's fault that I'm not here. It's God's fault that I didn't actually get the house that I wanted. It's God's fault that I don't have the job that I applied for. Because when you look at God's character, you cannot help but see that that is not the truth. Because his desire for us is to be sons and daughters. And I don't know if there's any parents in the room. I'm not a parent yet, but I can imagine that when I have kids, I'm going to want the best for them. I want to clear the way that my ceiling is their floor. That the past circumstances that I've gone through and the generations before me, they don't have to go through again. But there comes this alignment in our heart to accept that optimism is going to disappoint us every single time. Every single time. Because it is man-made. It is not something that we can cling to. It is not something that has any faithfulness in it or a testimony of, oh, optimism got me to this. It ends up being self-reliance. And when we're in self-reliance, we're not in a place where we can actually release and surrender to God. Because that's what the whole message of Jesus is, right? That we surrender unto him. We believe him, but we also surrender our lives. What does that take? It takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of wisdom and grace and strength, not of our own. Because he's just wild like that. He's like, oh my gosh, I want you to be so weak that you have to rely on my strength to continue. That is the opposite of what I physically and mentally want to desire in my life. I want to do it on my own. I want to figure it out on my own, right? I'm sorry, am I the only one? But here's the thing, when we release that, when we come in with an open hand and go, I actually am going to turn my heart to the one who created me. the one who can handle my disappointment, the one that he goes, I actually want you to get to the point where I can give you better strength than what you can create on your own. Because what we know to be our own strength is not even an ounce of what the Lord has for us. What the Lord can actually not make up for. Because see, that's the beautiful invitation, right? Oh, I'll just be weak. And then I'll still be a little strong here. We all do it. I'll just, brace myself for impact and whatever life's given me, right? Where's the surrender in that? Where's the surrender? When we encourage each other to worship, it's not to give you an answer to a problem. It's to call you into loving a God that has the answer. Anybody that has a relationship, whether it's friendship, marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance, friends at work, what does that look like? In practical terms, it looks like you want to spend time together, right? It looks like you plan to spend time together. If you're in a romantic relationship or a marriage, it means that you're intentional about your time. It means that you actually tell the person, hey, you're looking good this morning. That's all he wants to hear. That he's amazing. That he's awesome. In How to Worship a King, Zach Neese says, when love is the motivation of your heart, everything you do becomes worship. Everything. So it's not just a song that's played up here and we all unify with one voice. That means when Haley's doing the dishes, when she's delivering a baby, how about we do that? That's worship. When Bill is fixing the tractor at home, not that he's doing it right now. That's worship. When you go to the grocery store to take the money that God is giving you to be responsible for, purchasing every single thing that's going to stock your fridge, your pantry, that's worship. Why? Because the position of our heart is not me, 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 me. The position is I love a God who has been faithful in every aspect of my life. When you look at the word worship in the word, it literally means to minister to God. When we minister to God through our love, you love somebody. Like I was saying, you love somebody, you shower them with love and worship. Let's call it what it is. You're so amazing. You look great this morning. How can I serve you? Can I get you a coffee this morning? Can I just run to the store? Oh, we're out of this? Okay, I'll take care of it. Oh, let me take out the trash. And the cool thing is he's called us into friendship. He's called us into marriage. He's called us into all these things that he knows that our actions towards each other are going to be an act of worship towards him. Because I cannot communicate this enough in my whole entire life. Worshiping him is worth it every single time. Every single time. In Deuteronomy 10:8, it says, at the time the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister and to pronounce blessing in his name as they still do today. Originally, all the tribes were to do this. And then the Levites were set apart. And all their job was to do was to minister to the Lord. That's Old Testament. We're called to do that now. So what does that mean? That means posturing our heart to love God. And you know what's so offensive? Is we don't have to do anything except for love him. That is offensive to me in so many ways because I want to do. I want to get it done. I want to be the one to okay, God, this is what I did. Here's the list. Woo! I love a good list. I love a good whiteboard. Dear Jesus, they're from heaven. But if that's all that I bring to him, I still have nothing. The only thing he is asking is for our heart, for our love. For our love, to be demonstrative in different ways. To tell him that you love him. If you don't know what to say, the best thing you can do is pull out your phone and Google things to say to friends or spouses. They got really good lists. And if you still can't find a list because you're just overwhelmed with all of the results, because ADHDers, love ya, I'm right there with you. There's 3 words. I love you. That's it. You can say that for the rest of your life, and he will be so satisfied. You can think it for the rest of your life, and he will be so proud of you. You can have the desire to say it for the rest of your life. You can have the desire to even long to communicate that to him. And he will be so ecstatic that you're even thinking about it. Because that's the thing. That's the change. Is separating out the distraction that's always going to be there and pulling in and zoning into his eyes. Do we see his eyes physically? I haven't. Some people have. It's amazing. But if you can't, guess what he's given us? An amazing imagination. One thing that has set me free in so many different ways is the enemy cannot create. We know the author and finisher of all things. So if he cannot create, guess what we get released to do? Align ourselves with the kingdom and imagine with the Father than without. We have God wants us to minister to him because there is an intention. There is a purpose and a reason. Just like I find it fascinating when I read the word and all the things in the Old Testament that they had to do for purification. Anybody spent time and read that? Woo! You need an audiobook for that because it's long. And if nobody's telling that from the pulpit, they're lying. It's long. You can read it, but the comprehension, all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute. They knew to purify this part way before science caught up. Way before we had statistical things that proved out that sanitization was in a different, wow. So God actually thinks from science all the way up to heaven. He's got it covered. So when he calls us to minister to him, there's a reason and a purpose. I think one of those reasons for me personally has been strengthening my walk with him in times that are very dry, desert places. Anybody had like those places where you're like, I really can't see God, can't hear him, nothing's going on, I feel abandoned? Oh, I guess I'm the only one. But here's the thing is, if we have a God that is for us, that actually gifted us Christ as we're getting ready to go into Easter season, he's not going to, how do I say this? We're not going to go through a season ill-equipped. We're not going to go through a season where he's not there. We're not going to go through something that's going to break us. That one's hard, right? That one's hard to hear. But I would challenge you with this. When you feel that tension, take a breath and ask yourself, where am I? And then the second question I would encourage you to ask is, where is God? Ooh. That one's hard. Many of you know this, some of you might not, but my dad went through severe episodes of breaking things in 2008. Oh, okay. There's no volume online or here. On and off. Okay. So there was a season in 2008 where my dad broke things often. He actually broke 2 major femurs. Well, the only 2 he got. The only 2 he got. And then, in addition to that, the last one, they go, oh, your ribs are broken too. And there wasn't a fall. There wasn't anything that encouraged this by any means. And so I would say around that time, and there have been other things outside of that where I've walked in, but this one actually marked me in a really good way because I got real honest with God real fast. And I think that was probably the most honest I had been with him for a real long time, if ever. Because what I figured out was I actually didn't think God could handle it. Oh, you can't handle my disappointment. You can't handle my rage at this situation right now. You can't handle the deep sadness that I'm feeling. And you know what he said? He said, keep talking. See, the last thing that you can do is offend God. Or even say something he hadn't already heard yet. He is so capable, and more capable than we even give him credit for. But when we lead in those seasons with keeping talking, understanding our biblical hope and where it lies, because optimism, I didn't even want to talk about optimism. Don't even get me started. Somebody came with me in optimism. I had words. I had words for every single one of them, and thank God I was in this building because I would have said them if I was outside. Because I had a respect for this building. But I had a couple of things happen. I had people in my life who would pull me up in worship when I wanted to just sit in a chair. I had people in my life who would go, yep, God wants to hear it all. Go ahead, say it. Even if it feels scary. And when we came out of that season, personally, I had a deeper worship because I did not just brace myself. There were moments where I did. There's a lot of bracing. But when you allow worship in, you actually take your eyes off of the situation and you're anchored back in to knowing what he's done in your past, the promises that he's given to you for your now and your future, and this hopelessness that the enemy loves to come in and give to us and invite us into cannot stand in his presence. While we can be nourished here together in worship with one voice and agreement, our daily nourishment is received at home. See, this impacts our home, our families, neighbors, visitors, the repair person that comes across your threshold, down to the person standing in line at a grocery store. Why is this? Because chaos cannot waver you from remembering who he is when worship is a part of your daily life. See, we have all of these accounts in the Bible that lead us into understanding that building a relationship with God comes out of worship. And when that gets tapped into, there's breakthrough that happens. But what we've passed by real quick is that it took time. It wasn't an overnight process. A lot of times there were circumstances around that gave them the opposite impression of who God was. They gave them the opposite impression of his promises for their life. David's one of them, right? We love to talk about the things that he conquered, right? First thing, came out from the field, saw the Philistine, Goliath. Who's this man? What are you talking? Why is he talking like this? I'll take care of him. He was a real tiny man, little tiny boy, giant. Let's get after him. But what was happening before that? He was in a field by himself, rejected by his family, given the field work. I'm sorry, but being in a family, if somebody assigned me field work by myself for a really long time, I would feel rejected. I kind of feel like, do you really want me around? Are you sure you really want me around? So when that happens, what does he do? He takes care of what he has in front of him. He worships. He learns how to slay the bear and the lion. There's a lot that happens during that time. And there's a lot of what? Silence. You think about field in the middle of nowhere, taking care of flock. You're looking around. You start imagining things. I'm starting to imagine friends and people around me. Very hard to be in an isolated place in this world, especially now. But here's the thing that he got out of that. He understood who he was. He had the heart of God. When you look at all of the Old Testament, God had a process. He's like, there's a process to get to my presence. You have to do X, Y, and Z. To the point that if a priest was called in, even if they knew that he was called in, they still tied a rope around him to pull him out just in case they didn't hear right. I'm sorry, if I was the priest, I'd be like, you better hear exactly right, because I'm not risking it, even if I feel like I heard my own name. But David said, there's got to be more. There's got to be more. And so what he did was he took his season of feeling like he was rejected. I'm using my imagination a bit, but I mean, real life circumstances here, that looks like there's no way anybody wants to be around him. That's hard, especially coming from a family. But he goes, nope, this God that I've heard about, there's got to be more. To the point that when opposition came, when he was surrounded by everybody else's voice of don't go out there, don't do it, he's too tall, don't worry, he couldn't help but step in to his confidence in who he is. So I propose to you that the seasons of our desert places are actually to boost our identity, understand who we are, so that when we move into a place where there's a ton of noise around us, that we actually are anchored in the truth of who he sees us to be. Because we have all of this noise in this world. I love learning new things, but it is so overwhelming the amount of information that we have. We are physically not developed. We do not have the capacity physically as human beings. God did not create us to be a 24-hour news cycle, observer and consumer. But that's the world that we live in. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, I don't know who all I have here, but great, you know, all the things. We'll cover them all. All they had was a newspaper every once in a while. They look out, oh, the sun rose, oh, it went down, okay, let's go to bed. Oh, there's a radio program on, okay. Wow, can't believe that's happened in the world. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do my job. Now, every morning I wake up and I try my best to stay off my phone for the first hour of the morning, and it is very hard. I've not conquered that yet. But it's so fascinating because how the day goes, personally, observe this in your own life. Actually, there's a difference. There's a difference. It got to the point, last night, actually, Rachel and I were in my living room, and my sister and I go, oh my gosh, Gen Z is going back to flip phones because they're trying to get off of this digital stuff. And then, probably about a month ago, there was a viral reel on Instagram that was like, somebody's like, we just need a cord, and something with a phone attached and be able to, just leave it at home and just go about our lives. For those of you who don't know, that is called the original telephone. Rotary phone, all the things. But it's fascinating that we're now getting to the point where people are like, let's return back to the simplicity of life. Because what we find is in our overwhelming seasons, in our places where things feel dry, I'm not hearing the voice of the Lord. What happens in that silence? We all of a sudden start to hear things in our mind and in our heart that haven't been addressed until now. And what leads us back to the truth is worship. Because when we set our heart in loving the Father for who he is, we can't help but behold and become who he is to us. We say this often, what we behold, we become. And so that happened from Papa Leif Hetland. What we behold, we become. And so when we are in those seasons where you're like, I really don't want to worship right now, don't want to do it, I would challenge you that even if there is not feeling there, just showing up and going, God, I love you. Because in times of our relationships, saying I love you is a choice. Because feelings will come and go. Feelings are informative, just like our emotions. But they cannot be the only thing that we rely on. How to Worship a King, again, by Zach Neese. Religion teaches us that our function determines our worth and our identity. I am because I do. Worship teaches that our identity determines our worth and our function. I do because I am. And God determines our identity. It goes back to posturing our hearts. If all we do is go, God, I love you. Because a part of that statement was, I do because I am. How do you become I am if you are not loving and setting an attention to the I am, the great I am, the one who has created us? See, God doesn't just go, oh, you need to minister to me. He goes, there's an intention and a reason why I want to commune with you, because I know that this strengthens our bond. This strengthens the trust that I want you to have in me. This strengthens your idea of my hope for you. Communing with him wherever we are is something that I really want to challenge us on in this time. What does that mean? Growing up, one of the things that was, like I said, we stewarded worship in our home. Both of my parents are musical, one professionally and one real grassroots bluegrass. So that'll just, professional, non-professional, it was fun. And so one of the things that there were boundaries. Everybody has boundaries, right? If you don't, we all need them, right? Yes. There were boundaries, okay? So when we were in church, one of the things that I knew as a kid was the idea of practicing praise and worship. So on Sunday morning, if the kids were in church, I would look around and all my friends were coloring. And my parents like, you can do that, but you actually have to stand for at least 2 to 3 worship songs. What they didn't tell me was there was technically 4. So I was really just standing for the whole thing. They tricked me. But then they didn't stop there. They went on to go, hey, we actually worship at home too. What does that look like? That looks like seeing your parents pray, worshiping. In prepping for the message, I remember Pastor Jeff growing up, always standing on the promises of God. You don't have to sing, but his heart intention wherever he goes, standing on the promises of God. Step 20, 30, counts his steps. Or Kevin when he comes in whistling. We might not have to sing out, but we are posturing our heart. When you're doing the dishes, what are you doing? When you're prepping the meal, where you're sitting down, where is the posture of your heart? It's not your kid. It's not your husband. It's not your wife. It's not your friend. It's not your sister, your parents. It's your responsibility. What are the boundaries of how do I live out a life of worship to him? And if we root that in our love for who he is, we can't help but show up in that and reflect that in everything that we do. Second Corinthians 12:9 through 10. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. In 10, it says, that is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness and results in hardship and persecution and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So we've talked about worship up to this point. But what about praise? See, praise is something that we want to get it really excited about, right? But praise is something where we actually tap into the character of God. And it reminds me of proclaiming testimonies over people's lives. We've done that here where we're like, hey, the power of the testimony. In the word, you proclaim testimony over somebody who has cancer and, oh, this person had cancer, let them pray for you because they got healed. Praise is that same thing, where we get to proclaim the testimonies of who God is, what he's done, his faithfulness, and go forth of encouraging our heart and those around us to take heart and go, hey, it ain't over. So while we're ministering to the Lord in worship by posturing our heart in love, we're also praising him going, hey, don't forget, you did this. And guess what? You're going to continue to do this later on. And don't forget, oh, you also did this for me, and that's actually going to impact my kids' future because you're amazing. And he's so faithful. He's so faithful. If we can proclaim and talk about what people have done in our lives, in the world, if we can click that share button on Facebook, how much more would we gain from focusing that on who he is in his character? The impact of that. Paul and Silas did this while they were arrested. So, again, let's use our imagination. Paul and Silas, arrested unjustly. And they sat in the prison and they lifted up their song. I don't know if they could sing. I would like to imagine, I hope it was on key, but they might not have cared. Because you get to the point where you don't care. Because his love is worthy enough. His love is beyond your imagination. His love is worth shouting from the rooftops. But Paul and Silas did something that I don't think many of us would do. They took their impossible situation and decided not to try to figure out how to get out, but how to worship from that place. I don't know about you, but if I'm in a really difficult place, the first thing on my mind is, how do I get out of here? That is challenging, right? And then when we look in the Bible, we have people like Paul and Silas in front of our face going, do you really need to get out of this, or do you just need to praise? There have been many people throughout the ages outside of the Bible, thinking of Corrie ten Boom and the Holocaust. I'm thinking of people who are in prison in China, who delight in the Lord in the worst circumstances. And we get offended about who's elected. God wants his sons and daughters. He wants you just as you are. He wants you in the best of seasons, and he wants you in the jail cell. He loves you, and he desires to hear that right on back. Because what ends up happening with Paul and Silas is, in their worship and their praise, the doors of the jail open supernaturally. Every jail opens. So notice that. Their worship didn't just impact their door opening, it impacted the whole jail opening. Think about that in modern times. You have somebody get arrested, they start praising and worshiping, all of a sudden the locks don't work anymore. Ooh. That would be scary. Oh, just me, okay. Everybody else is tough. Y'all can handle it. Got it. But watch what happens. Paul and Silas goes, hey, everybody stay put. And they obeyed. Like, they were like, oh, sure, dude, I'll just stay here. It's open. I don't want to go home. Because what you'll find is, when you keep your eyes fixed on your first love, you can't help but honor the people who persecute you. You can't help but honor the people who frustrate you, who really get you going. You can't help but be offensive to the norm of what you should have done when really you're answering what he's calling you to do. He doesn't want normal followers. He wants people who his heart longs for him, because he is so proud of you for not even doing one thing. And the amazing thing is that in Paul and Silas's worship, there was so much gained in the kingdom. They were able to minister out of that. And what's interesting is now, in this day and age, with science advancement, there are sounds that they're finding that when you reach a pitch, everybody has seen like glass break when somebody's like singing real high. I won't do it. I won't do it. But when you get a certain pitch, what they found is it's called resonating, where you match the sound of the object itself, and it can't help but break. Actually, they had a bridge where they didn't engineer it correctly, and the whole bridge, metal, was wobbly because the wind resonated with it passing through. And they had to redo the whole thing. So I would propose to you that their worship actually resonated with that jail cell, with that lock. The same way when the Israelites lifted up their voice, that the walls of Jericho crashed, actually went down. It didn't crumble. If you read the scripture, it went down into the ground. It sunk in. I've always imagined that real different. There's a lot of rubble around. No, it just went shoo. To imagine that our voice and our sound, that the God that made everything wants that to align with his heart. And when that happens, the things that have felt impossible to move and to shift and to move forward actually start to break, actually start to become more flexible, actually start to move out of the way. Because what we're not focused on is how is this going to, how are things going to move out of the way for me, but how can I love him more? It surrenders this idea of idolatry of how can this work out for me? But how can I actually worship the Lord from my heart with a love that will increase through whatever season I'm going through? Because he actually sent Jesus, the one that we can lean into, the one that gives us authority, the one who went through every type of situation and was tested in all things. So your situation, he's not surprised with. He actually goes, that makes sense. I see that. Yeah, that's so hard. It's really hard. I am so sorry. Let me cry with you. Let me come alongside and be with you. But the amazing thing about God is he gives us the opportunity to choose in. Because his love is unconditional. And he's one of those gods that's not like, you need to do X, Y, and Z to equal this, my love. He goes, nope. I want you to choose in to knowing me, to being with me. Because I love you for who you are. Go ahead and stand this morning. So a couple of things this week. The challenge for every single one of you in this room is to find moments to just whisper, I love you. That's all you need to do. To find a moment, whether you're washing your dishes, whether you're driving in your car, whether somebody's just chewed you out over the phone, or whether you've chewed somebody else out over the phone. I challenge you in the easiest of moments and the hardest of moments to show up, take a breath in, and on your way out, say, I love you. See, Sundays here are not for us to always take. Yes, we'll be encouraging one another to come up and lift up one voice. But this isn't the norm. The daily's the norm. How we do things, the posture of our hearts. Don't spend an hour. Don't even spend 5 minutes. That's not the challenge for this morning. 3 words. 2 seconds. At a time. Say it as many times as you can remember. If you don't remember, that's okay. If you do remember, great. But guess what? You don't get extra points. Being who you are and just showing up for Him is enough. Go ahead and reach your hands out up to the heavens. God, I just thank you for who you are. God, this morning, any part of this message, if there's anything that we are marked by, let us be marked by the call that you have to just be with us. God, I just ask that this week as people go forth, that you will just seal this time and just let it pop up. The reminder, my voice, your voice, calling their name. And let the I love you from their heart, whether they feel it or not, whether they just think it, Lord, let them feel your presence tangibly. Impact their dreams, Father. Help them have strange events that they cannot not see your love. God, encourage them. Every single person in this room, encourage them this week. May they go forth with a heart of worship and a hope that is rooted in who you are and your truth. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you.